Hey,
Hey, what's going on, man?
I don't know. Hi.
I'm trying to find.
Good start to the show. I planned that out perfectly. Hi, Pete. You're Pete. I'm Scott. This is the end of the empire. That's a cool name for show. Oh, I got my volume up way too high in here. How's that? Is that a little better?
Yeah,
How's things going, man?
doing good, man. I'm just putting this out on Twitter and a couple other places,
Okay, that's
so
good.
they can see that we are live now.
Yeah. So there's
Hey, there was something we didn't talk about last week that is a real. I mean, something really to be celebrated. The name of this podcast and the art was recommended. The name was recommended, and the art was done by someone who goes by Neoconremover uh, on Twitter, and
yeah. Is he still on there or he got removed?
he's on there.
Oh, really? You know what? Did he like get temporarily removed and I had to refollow him or something?
Sometimes he shuts his account off and stuff like
Okay.
that. Yeah, you just have to check. But I mean,
I'll have to look into that again.
this is just one of the
I was
coolest
laughing
things
my
I've
ass
ever
off there at
seen.
him for a while.
So he told me the whole story. I don't think he wants me to give details, but this wasn't at a gun range. It was somewhere else. Some dude was just messing around with a shotgun and showing what a Barney badass he was.
Mm-hmm.
And it went off and it got his wife right behind the knee.
I saw that.
And and he asked me so that he wouldn't have to get doxxed and give his real name if I'd set up a GoFundMe for him and everything.
Yeah.
And he only asked, he said, she need $10,000 to get through. She's not working. I'm working from home, so I'm going to probably be making less money. And within 15 hours, it was completely funded just from Twitter.
Yeah, I felt bad about that too because I guess I logged into Skype. Maybe I had Skype off for a couple of days or something. I opened Skype and saw your note, and I went and retweeted it. And then after I retweeted it, I went and followed the link, and it was already over. I was like, "Oh,
people are still
you guys took care of it, man."
Well, people still have the ability, and people still are donating. So
cool, which I did too. Yeah.
It turns out that I mean, she's in a lot of pain, man, and she's suffering. So
like big time surgery to reconstruct everything.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, a lot of those pellets. It was bird shot, so you had a lot of pellets, and a lot of those pellets are still in there. So, I mean, it's going to take.
Punch the other guy in the head a bunch of times, or what?
I'll tell you the story off air. I'm sure he does not want this story told on air, but no,
he didn't hurt. He punched that other guy a lot of times.
Well, I'll tell you. Okay, so yeah, I know, but I just wanted to thank everybody who donated money because that was so cool. It just really shows that this community can come together and make things happen if we need to.
Yeah, that is really great. And so sorry to her if you're watching this lady. I'm really sorry about that happening. That's crazy.
So
I saw another one today where the guys that usually it's a kid shoots a kid. This time the toddler shot his own father. I was like, guys, it's wonderful to have guns. They're better than peanut butter. They're the greatest thing ever. But try to keep them where your toddlers can't get them. Is that too much to ask for people to be responsible with how they treat these things? How could you even be pointing the barrel of your weapon at some guy's wife's knee? It shouldn't, right? Like, how does that even happen? How is her knee on the other end of where your gun's pointed right now?
It just goes somebody
who Baldwin
doesn't know what the hell they're doing. Before we even started, Casey Johnson over here gave us a $20 super chat, and he said, "Scott, you're the man. Pete, no offense, I'm good. I hope you two cover Dr. Peter, whoever the fuck, on Joe Rogan Experience. 3 hours of hysteria killing by someone with an angel voice. Keep up the good work, both of you."
All I saw was the one short clip of him saying, they discouraged treatments in order to push the vaccine, which I thought was pretty clear all along.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying hydroxychloroquine works, but just that they didn't want to know whether it worked or not, or whether they could figure out something to mix it with to make it work or any kind of thing. They just didn't, that was pretty obvious all along, I think. But yeah.
It was 3 hours of, there was nothing there that I hadn't heard before, but it definitely was against pretty much every corporate narrative that has come out in the last 2 years. And um yeah, it was just shocking to see it on the biggest podcast in the world.
Yeah. I guess I see the news stories hitting and missing here and there about California this and New York City that, but there hadn't been anything like real restrictions in Texas in a very long time, other than I guess, they close like very large indoor gatherings like concerts and stuff like that was, I
Mhm.
guess, the thing that lasted the longest, which is bad. But otherwise, you wouldn't know that any of that hysteria is still going on here. But I guess I don't really keep a list in my head of all the places where it's still the spring of 2020 as far as their local governments are concerned and the way they're treating this thing. And I
Yeah,
guess New York City is the worst of all of those.
New York is definitely the one that everybody's pointing to. I mean, there are people getting arrested for trying to go into places, things like that. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. Again, I don't know what else to say except the first thing that comes to my mind is I'm predicting a massive swing to the right over this. You cannot expect Americans to put up with this for very long. Not that the Republicans have a very strong narrative at all of,
yeah,
being the opposite of that, which how dumb could they be that that's not their program? They complain about Fauci or whatever, but they don't say, we will liberate you from the democratic tyranny. They don't talk about that at
yeah,
all in that frame it in that way. But I think they're going to win because of this stuff, despite themselves, because just the Democrats are clearly so much worse and just so intent on foisting this on people in a way that's just so far beyond reasonable. It's crazy.
yeah. Next
So,
year's elections, without any shenanigans, should be a red slaughter. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it just seems like that's the way it's going to be.
But I mean, then again, never underestimate the Republicans' capability to shoot themselves in both feet and the stomach. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. They're terrible.
yeah.
They're absolutely terrible. Uh,
So yes. So speaking of which, and this was one of the, and we should have announced we got Jonathan Newman from Mises is coming on. I have his new book, but I haven't looked at it yet. But can't wait to talk with him about it here. So we're gonna do some economics here in a few.
I just talked with them about it yesterday. We were talking
Oh,
about
really?
we did an episode on John Randolph of Roanoke, and
Oh, cool.
just
Listen, I'm
like
just
one
gonna
of
shut
the
up and let you guys handle it, man, for the second half hour here.
yeah
But
we were we that was a lot of fun because if you look at John Randolph of Roanoke, you can see like a proto libertarian, and yeah, it was that was a lot of fun.
well, I read the first half of the first volume of Conceived in Liberty by Murray Rothbard before I eventually had to put it down in favor of something else one time. But that is the story of early America. There's a lot of proto-libertarianism going around along there.
Yeah.
I learned a lot of my libertarianism from reading about them and that generation long before I ever heard of,
Oh yeah.
any of our modern day libertarian leaders at all. But
Yeah.
um, as most Americans did, if before they forgot it anyway. Um, but I was going to say, segue from the horribleness of the Republicans, that the chairman of the National Republican Party tweeted out that Biden is weak and is appeasing the evil Vladimir Putin, and unlike the tough guy Donald Trump who'd face him down. So I wrote a little tweet about how no, man, the narrative is supposed to be that the crisis is all the Democrats' fault, and the Republicans want to be friends with everybody because we believe in America first now. Remember that? America first. But so they are very horrible, and the Republicans their instincts are horrible. In fact, Donald Trump, Mr. America First himself, put out a message this week, an email message saying that Trump is weak and that Biden is weak and caused this problem through his weakness in the face of Putin, who he was strong against and whatever. So, they can't figure out another way to approach it other than Republicans, tough guys, Democrats, weaklings, because that's just easy. And they're easy. But so the good news, though, is that Biden has backed down and on the big issues of, the possibility of bringing Ukraine into NATO or sending American troops to intervene in a possible war there, that he said that will not happen. Neither of those things will happen. And, he said for the next 10 years, we won't bring them into NATO, which is indefinitely anyway. So that's the good news. Of course, it's the Americans who precipitated this crisis without even going back to the coup of 2014. But just since Biden came into office, he's been, trying to really reinitiate the Cold War in a way that Trump did in practice, but without the theoretical framework for it all, right? But Biden is saying it's the democracies versus the autocracies, which is just a total lie, right? America flanked by all royal families on all sides, military dictators and el presidentes and potentates from around the world, sultans and emirs and sheikhs and whatever you got, anything but democracies. But anyway, no, it's us and the democracies versus the autocracies, Russia and China. And they've been, escalating bomber flights and naval missions in the Baltic and Black Seas, especially. And they've been sending more arms to Ukraine, more than Trump did, which is primarily Lockheed Javelin missiles, which are handheld anti-tank missiles. And they're, I guess, arguing about whether to give them Stingers or not, anti-aircraft missiles, like they gave the Mujahideen in the 80s to take out the Russian helicopters. So, that was really what. Oh, and I guess there's this great piece that we ran yesterday, Pete, or 2 days ago on antiwar.com by James Webb Jr. or James R. Webb, the son of the former senator, who himself is a veteran and very knowledgeable about this stuff. And he wrote a piece about how the Russians are not likely to invade Ukraine right now, but he's describing the buildup. The Washington Post originally claimed 175,000 Russian troops were building up on the other side of the border. They've now, lowered that down to about 120,000. But he quotes experts there saying that essentially this was a deterrent. They were never threatening to invade. They were threatening that Kiev better not restart up the war against the separatist provinces in the east. And so, what they're doing as a deterrent, the Americans are spinning as an attempted, a preparation for an invasion. And, I talked with Dave DeCamp, our news editor at antiwar.com, about this. And he had written about how the Americans said, oh, no, the Russians are going to invade. The Washington Post kicked this all off at the beginning of November. The Russians are going to invade with 175,000 guys. And the Ukrainians were like, what? No, they're not. What are you talking about? And then the Americans hit him with the elbow and said, yes, they are too. That's the narrative. Go along with it, kind of thing. And then the Ukrainians said, oh, yeah. No, yeah, we also are terrified that the Russians are about to invade, when it was clearly not what was going on there. So, but anyway, I mean, the good news there is that Biden backed down on bringing them into NATO, but he's still sending arms, although mostly, relatively light arms. But so it's still a provocation. But so the headline on antiwar.com today is that Putin has proposed negotiations and issued a written set of proposals for agreements to resolve the issue. So the news story at antiwar.com said they hadn't published exactly what all the details were of what the proposals were, but it's presumably, you promised to not try to bring Ukraine into NATO, and then we'll promise to work with the Donbass region to make them cooperate with Kiev, as long as Kiev wants to go along with their agreement for the strong federalism for the eastern regions, et cetera, like that, along those lines. But it's been proposed for a very long time that the West treat Ukraine as they treated Austria and Finland in the Cold War, which is just neutral. Just leave them out of it. They're stuck right in the middle, and it makes no sense for them to choose one side or the other and make enemies of the other, and just let them be neutral and leave it alone. And so, I always like to refer to this, Pete, and I think it's really important that people look at this. It's now a word from X by the evil Thomas Friedman in the New York Times. It's from 1998. And he's interviewing George Kennan, who was the grayest of graybeard foreign policy guys from after World War II, who originally essentially originated the containment policy against the Soviet Union, with his article on the sources of Soviet conduct in foreign affairs in 1946. And so this is the 1990s, and he's just stomping his feet, mad as hell, going off to Thomas Friedman about how irresponsible it is for Bill Clinton and the Senate to go along with this proposal to expand to expand NATO into Eastern Europe, despite their promises. And he said, everyone is saying now that if we do this, it's no problem because it's not aimed at the Russians anymore. The Russians are our friends. We're just trying to spread stability and rules-based order and drinking buddies to include new countries, but it's all good, man. And you say that now, but then when you get the Russian reaction, you'll say, see, that's why we have to do this, because of the aggression of the Russians. But that's just not right. That's the reaction, and that's what I'm telling you is going to happen right now, says George Kennan in 1998. So that's exactly what we're dealing with now, is America not just bringing Poland and Hungary into the NATO alliance, but the Baltic states already, and they perpetually threaten to bring in Georgia and Ukraine, which is like Russia threatening to bring Canada and Mexico into the Warsaw Pact. We absolutely would never stand for that in a million years. But we expect the supposed psychopathic madman autocrat Vladimir Putin to just sit there and take it. But what do we owe the Ukrainians? Nothing, right? Like what? I mean, that's first of all, nothing. But then what interest of ours are they? Nothing. Unless somehow you have a plan to gangsterize them out of their wheat fields and turn all that over to Archer Daniels Midland or something. But Pete, Archer Daniels Midland is not the United States of America. That's just some Americans. In fact, a very few of them. And if they have something at stake there, some oil companies or some, agribusiness concerns have business there, that doesn't equate to the national interest of the United States of America. And certainly not enough to get in a conflict with Russia over trying to bring them over to the West. And really what it is it's not even about any alleged benefit to the West. It's about sticking it to the Russians. It's about trying to figure out a way to take their naval base at Crimea away, which just backfired on them. Because when they overthrew the government there for the second time in 10 years, the Russians said enough of this and went ahead and took the entire damn peninsula so that they wouldn't have to worry about getting kicked out of their base on it. So, bluff already called. Why are we still dealing with this? And I'll have the clip here pretty soon tonight, I think, of when I was on the Kennedy show last night. I had the chance to say it's in the Victoria Nuland phone call that she says she was contacted by Jake Sullivan, who was that time Vice President Biden's national security advisor. And he said Biden is on board to do a conference call to give the coup plotters an attaboy and help the deets to stick, she says. So our current president was then the vice president holding the Ukraine brief in the Obama government, and who was instrumentally involved in plotting the coup that overthrew the government in 2014. So him climbing down now is him only solving a problem that he helped to create in the first place. Remember, the reason, I wish I'd had time to say all this on Kennedy's show, the reason that his boy Hunter, the crackhead, got the job at the oil company was because that oil company had been tight with the previous government that the father Biden had overthrown. So this oil company said, oh no, we might be in big trouble with the new regime. So in order to ingratiate ourselves with the new regime, we'll hire who? The son of the new prime minister? No, the son of the American vice president, to ingratiate themselves with the new regime, since the Americans were the ones who had created it. So that was the key to that. So anyway, it's picking a fight we shouldn't be in whatsoever. But, luckily Biden is not as tough as he thinks, at night as he thinks he is in the morning or whatever. So he tends to back down and not follow through with the worst things that he could be doing. But there was one more thing I wanted to say about that. I think I wrote it down. Oh, yes. Two more things I wanted to say about that, Pete. The first one is Colonel Douglas MacGregor. I think we talked about this last time, maybe, had written this thing in the American Conservative about Pearl Harbor. and saying, you call it deterrence, but you're deterring right up in somebody's nose in a way that it really amounts to aggression, and they're liable to knock your block off rather than be deterred. They're liable to go ahead and hit you first. And that's the situation we're putting ourselves in Taiwan and in Ukraine. And that's what we should not be doing. This is a guy who knows a thing or two about war. Okay. And he's a tough guy. He's also the smartest guy in the room. Colonel MacGregor is. He's really an impressive character. But so then he wrote this other one for the national interest, where he says America would lose a war in Ukraine. And he goes through and names the numbers of how many combat brigades the Russians have, how many men, how many rockets, how powerful those rockets are, what kind of anti-aircraft they have, what kind of, anti-armor, what kind of infantry power they can array, how they're likely to invade. They'll go from here to here. They'll take from this river to that river in this amount of time. And this is a guy who has studied this and, in fact, practiced fighting them in this region of Europe. And says, don't do it, can't do it. There's nothing that is to be gained about this, from this. We would just lose. And so we should not be bluffing. In fact, there's a great piece. Who wrote it? I'm sorry, I forget right now. It's the Spotlight. Oops. It's the Spotlight on antiwar.com today. It's Andrew Cockburn. Ghosts of Georgia 2008 should be haunting Kiev right now. So that's the one where in August 2008, Mikhail Saakashvili believed that George W. Bush would back him up and invaded South Ossetia, there next to the Caspian Sea in the Caucasus Mountains. And America did not come to his rescue when the Russians came across the mountains and beat their ass and kicked them back out of South Ossetia again. And so Andrew Cockburn is saying, hey, Ukraine, you ought to be paying attention to that. The Americans encouraged the uprisings in Hungary and the Czech Republic too. And then they sat back and did nothing as the Soviets crushed them, ask the Kurds in Iraq especially, but also in Syria and in Turkey, how many times they've been betrayed by the United States, where we back them for a little while and then back their enemies against them or turn them over to their tender mercies or however it works, Americans have no desire whatsoever to die in a war with Russia over Ukraine. Now, maybe there's a few kooks in Washington, D.C., but at the end of the day, is that really enough to get us into a war over it? Nah. There's just no support whatsoever for this kind of thing other than in the halls of power. And, surprisingly, there have been some right-wing commentators who've been saying some pretty good stuff about this. Tucker Carlson, of course, not surprisingly, had a great bit on TV or two last week, including an interview with MacGregor about it. But that guy, Kurt Schlichter, who I don't know too much about him, but all I know of him is as a war hawk. And he wrote a piece that someone quoted and wrote on Twitter that, God, this guy sounds like Scott Horton 4 or 5 times in this article, and what he says about why it's just not worth it to the American people to risk ourselves over Ukraine. And, they really act like they don't know the Russians got thousands of nukes. So let me just stipulate. They've got thousands of nukes, thermonukes, one of which would destroy your entire city, kill all of you. So, that's a war we can never fight. And they seem to think that this is, I know I'm redundant, but it's a good point. Gareth Porter's book about Vietnam is called The Perils of Dominance. And it's about how the reason we got into that war is because the American government, they knew that they were so much more powerful than Russia and China combined, that they said, we can just do whatever we want. They were telling the American people that we were supposed to be terrified. But they knew that they had so many more missiles and so many more nukes and so many more combat brigades and so many more ships and so much more everything. And they just thought, yeah, Vietnam should be easy, right? What could possibly stop us when it's us versus these twerps, But then, of course, that kind of dominance actually just leads to hubris and inflicted wounds, if not total self-destruction, which is, of course, the story of Vietnam. That they got, knee deep in the big muddy, as the song goes, and wouldn't turn around. So, and then the one more thing was Ray McGovern has a piece today about President Xi said we have more than an alliance with the Russians, which Ray McGovern points out. Well, the New York Times hastens to add that they do not have a formal alliance, but maybe they don't need one. They seem to be working very closely together to balance against the Americans. They've announced they have their new alternative to the SWIFT international financial network that they're working on to protect themselves from American sanctions and all of that. So, I don't know what that amounts to. I mean, I hope it amounts to a checkmate in a way that the Americans realize that what the hell are they going to do about it? They're not in a position to do anything about it. And the rest of the world doesn't believe them when they want to rally the rest of the world against them. Again, the democracy summit they held the other day, that thing is a joke. The Americans soaking in blood, holding hands with the Saudi king, talking about the democracy alliance against the forces of darkness. You got to be kidding me. Nobody takes that seriously. Nobody in the world.
We got a question here in the super chat from Polaris 589. He says, what's the likelihood that the neocons will be run out of the GOP in the near future? I think most of them are gone at this point, aren't they?
Well, Bill Kristol and a few have gone. Well, like Richard Pearl was always a card carrying Democrat. I don't think he ever, some of these guys always were. I like Max Boot, people like that. I'm not sure. Charles Krauthammer's dead. I'm not sure he counts as a real actual neoconservative in the Republican Party anymore. There must be a few. I mean, but the problem is that just plain old Republican hawks are impressed by neoconservative arguments all the time. You know what I mean? Everything is the fallacy of 38, as Justin Logan put it, where everyone is Neville Chamberlain trying to appease everyone else who's Adolf Hitler. And it's the only way to look at any negotiation that ever took place. And so, you don't talk to evil, you fight it, blah, blah, blah. And right-wingers love that kind of crap, And man, there's that great clip from the movie JFK where Donald Sutherland is explaining like what it's all about. Mr. X, Fletcher Prouty. He says, look, the organizing principle of any society is the war power. Who has the ability to organize us together and make us all go fight together. You know what I mean? That's essentially what it's all about. And so you could argue it's a pretty primal thing, especially among people who don't really have an argument about how, civilization and the desire to have one should be against that. You know what I mean? But who just relish it. They're like, yeah, let's fight. If the enemy is not Saddam Hussein, then it must be the Ayatollah. And if it's not the Ayatollah, then it must be Vladimir Putin. And if it ain't Vladimir Putin, then it must be Chairman Xi. And if it ain't him, then it's Gaddafi. Oh, we already killed Gaddafi? Well, must be somebody then. We got to go after somebody because somebody out there is bad. Somebody out there. I was talking with a friend of mine this morning. He said his auntie was worried that the Russians are coming here. They're going to invade and take over America like Red Dawn. They're massing, she said, at the border. And he goes, auntie, what border? The border of Ukraine, 7,000 miles east of here, Well, it could happen, she said. No, it could not happen, auntie. Like they could nuke your city, but no, they could not take over our country from any direction. But it's fun to be afraid. And TV will make it seem as though you really are in danger, and people like that kind of fear. It's like going to see a horror movie on the Friday night, on date night. So, I shouldn't be giving advice to the war party here, but I guess I'm just saying it's pretty easy for them to get people excited and get people afraid of things that could never be,
Hey, Patrick.
All right,
Newman.
we got him.
Yeah, I'm right here.
All right, welcome, Patrick. How are you doing?
Good. What about yourself?
Doing great. Got Pete here too. I got your book. What the hell did I do with it? It's on the pile.
All right.
But I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm aware that Pete is much more familiar than me. So I'm going to shut up and back out of the way and let you guys talk here for a little while.
Well, he and I have already done 2 episodes on certain sections of the book. One
What's
of the things.
title? Where is it? I have it here somewhere.
Oh, it's called Cronyism: Liberty versus Power in Early America, 1607 1849. Right there. Yeah.
Great. Oh, here it is. Aha. See, I get to show it too.
All right. Yeah.
That's the proof
Thanks.
I'm not lying. I have it.
Yeah. That's all that
So I was-
matters, right?
1607 through
Yeah.
1849. You said that part too fast. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Liberty
thanks.
versus power in America. Okay, so now you guys talk about it. Go ahead.
Well, the funny thing is, one of the things I said as I think after we stopped recording yesterday was Patrick Newman's like the reverse Tom Woods. Like Tom Woods is this guy with a PhD in history who's really well known for economics, and Patrick's like a PhD in economics who's getting well known as a historian, and it's pretty wild.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, it's a nice compliment. It is kind of funny. I never thought of it like that. I was always someone who's very interested, inspired by Tom Woods. I had grown up reading all of his books, and I was on his podcast early on initially. And yeah, it's cool to be compared to him. So it's a nice compliment, and I'm definitely moving more into history. But I think there's a lot there. A lot of things to talk about, particularly the subject of cronyism.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you on about is because everyone's hearing about inflation. The regime says inflation's good. You're hearing that from. It seems like all of the corporate press got their talking points on that one, but why do we have inflation right now? And maybe you can just give a primer on what's going on right now. Even Biden says prices are going up, but it's not a bad thing. So why are prices going up? I guess that's something that affects everyone.
Okay. Yeah. This is a subject I've also spent a lot of time on, especially as an economist. Why are prices going up? Is it because of capitalist greed? That's what Senator Elizabeth Warren would have us believe. Is it because of transitory supply shocks? That's what many leading officials in the economy would have us believe. There's decrease in the supply of goods, and these will go away. Is it due to an increase in the money supply? Right. That's what a lot of people, Austrians such as myself and many others, have increasingly been arguing. In reality, inflation is really due to the government completely misunderstood the severity of its lockdowns and locking people down, incentivizing people to stay home through unemployment benefits, through stimulus checks, discouraging people from working because of vaccine mandates, the rent moratorium, etc. That's caused a lot of workers to remain off on the sidelines or to just permanently retire. In addition, we printed a lot of money. The money supply, M2, since the beginning of 2020 has increased by about 40%. That's a tremendous increase over 2 years. The money supply in 2021 alone is on track to increase by about 15%. This is M2, most commonly preferred definition, to the extent mainstream economists even talk about the money supply anymore. That's on line with years in the 1970s, if not a little bit greater. This is different than in 2008 when bank reserves dramatically increased, but the money supply increase didn't really occur because the Fed was paying interest on excess reserves. But you're seeing now money supply has been increasing. People have been spending it. Businesses have been spending it. Their PPP loans, consumer stimulus checks, etc. Demand is outstripping supply. That's causing shortages, and those shortages are leading to price increases. So the reason why prices are going up is simple. It's because of the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what it always is. But
yeah.
Libertarians always get blamed. They say that we always blame everything on the government. So, I mean, there has to be something that the greedy capitalists have been doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what people would have us believe regarding meat prices. I saw a great meme on Twitter recently where someone had a picture of the percentage change in meat prices from the 70s. And whenever the prices were going up, they had this label that says greedy capitalists. And then when the prices were falling, it said altruistic capitalists, right? And, it's not as if the pandemic has made businesses any greedier. Now, has the pandemic caused a lot of small businesses to fail, which has increased consolidation, has encouraged more people to shop online, which has given stores such as Amazon more market power? Absolutely. The COVID lockdowns have had a cartelist component, that creates sort of mini cartels. But it's the government policies that have been restricting the supply, of various goods, especially labor, and it's the government that's been increasing the money supply tremendously, in encouraging people to spend it through stimulus checks, through loans to businesses, even the government itself. So you're seeing a lot of pressures building up that's causing prices to go up, and a lot of economists did not think this is going to happen. I remember very early on in April, when that was really the first month you started to see CPI increases go up. That was like, whoa, okay, something's going on here. Analysts had predicted a monthly increase of 0.2. In April, it turned out to be 0.8, right? So this information was coming out in May, showing that something odd was going on. People said, oh, this will be over by the end of the summer. Inflation rates did decline. The monthly increases did start to decrease at or increase at a slower rate in August, but then prices started to increase again. And it's not just in things such as used cars and other goods related to the reopening of the economy. The price increases are becoming more broad-based. They're spreading out. Food prices are going up. Energy prices are going up. Rents are going up. Core inflation, which is increases minus food and energy, to sort of, it's their way of reducing the inflation rate. They're saying, oh, those are volatile. But that's up to about 5%, which is historically huge. So you can't deny that price increases have occurred. The government is still playing sort of a retreating battle by saying, oh, it's going to be temporary, et cetera. But it's increasingly looking less likely, especially now that at least the Fed has stated that they're going to begin to engage in some sort of contractionary monetary policy. How credible that is, I don't know.
Got anything, Scott?
Yeah, so that was going to be my question. Was the big headline was that Chairman Powell has said, oh no, man, you guys are right, and now it's time to start raising interest rates. And they already said they were going to taper off their asset purchasing program and all of that, but now they're going to taper it faster and raise interest rates sooner. So the question is, I guess, judging from what you just said, do you believe that at all? Or in other words, like, how bad of a crash are we facing? Because as Rothbard teaches, they always try to prick the bubble and let the air out slowly, but that doesn't work. It pops, it crashes, and there's going to be hell to pay. And I guess what I really want to know is the housing market going to crash soon so I could buy a house after that? Because right now the price of a house in Austin, Texas has gone up by $150,000 in the last year. So you talk about price inflation. How about in that specific sector? It's completely out of control.
Yeah, I mean, don't complain to me. I live in Tampa. That's another area that the real estate has been soaring. Now, I was lucky. I renewed my rent contract in March of last year. So I got in right before rent started to go up. Now, the way they actually calculate housing price increases in the CPI is absolutely ridiculous. That's a side note. They literally bake it in. They delay it by several months. It's known as something owner equivalent rent. So they ask people who own homes how much they think they could rent their house for. And that's always been a trick they've done, which is delayed increases in rent to show up in the CPI. We're starting to see that now. Even though home prices have increased for the past year, it's only recently really rents are starting to go up. But regarding the Federal Reserve's at least announcement to engage in contractionary monetary policy, it's a tricky subject because I think, and this is definitely an Austrian point. It's also been made by other free market economists. There's a strong tendency for what's known as a political business cycle, because everything right now, why Republicans are bringing up inflation so much, why Democrats are trying to say it's going to go down next year, et cetera, all revolves around the midterms. The Democrats have a very thin majority in the House. They have an extremely thin majority in the Senate, right? They basically have to have a tiebreaker by the vice president, and all the Democrats vote on bills. Biden really wants the economy to do good in be doing good in October, November of 2022. Richard Nixon was in the same position when he was looking for re-election. He forced Arthur Burns to basically increase the money supply, juice up the economy before the election. He put in price controls to try and tamp down on inflation. And then after that, after he won an election, then he removed the price controls, money supply kept increasing. Then you started to see the stagflation of the 70s develop. Powell is at least up for reappointment in early 22. He wants to keep his boss happy. Biden has the ability to appoint many more people to the Board of Governors. Janet Yellen, a former Fed chair, is now Secretary of the Treasury. This is something we haven't seen happen since, except for a very brief time. It was in the late 70s under Carter. Again, the era of stagflation. So I think the Fed right now, they're still committed to their strategy of, keep on printing the money, keep the bubble going, at least until 2022. I could only see the Fed actually start to engaging meaningful policy if inflation continues to be a problem, or the federal or the government, Biden, they start using the Fed as a punching bag. But even the announcement recently about the Fed engaging contractionary monetary policy, you have to kind of digest it for a little bit, because what Powell is really saying in the Fed speak is saying, all right, we've been making excess purchases of about $120 billion a month in various government securities, in mortgage securities, and some other things. We're going to speed up our deceleration. We're going to speed up us retiring, winding down those purchases. So they're not even going to engage in contractionary monetary policy until about the spring of next year. It's just, they're just going to engage in less expansionary monetary policy. And then they said they're going to raise rates 3 increases penciled in 2022. Okay. Maybe. Well, one of those is definitely going to be after the election. I can absolutely guarantee you that. So that one doesn't even really count. And the other thing is, we've played this game before in the mid 2010s. The Fed was constantly saying they were going to raise rates, and they delayed increasing, et cetera. This is the boy who cried wolf. So will Powell actually raise rates? I'm not sure. Inflation will have to continue to be bad for him to actually do anything meaningful. I think central banks are kind of committed to making the party go on a little bit longer, the Federal Reserve especially, because Biden wants the economy to be good for the elections in 22.
Yeah. I don't know, if I was the Democrats, I'd take the hit now so that we're back on the upswing for 24, because this is a worse bubble than under Obama. It's much steeper, much higher, much quicker than the post 2008 bubble, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is one where you're actually starting to see the inflation. I think what their game plan is, for me to honestly think, is that they're hoping that, okay, if the Fed if there's actually a bubble and they're going to engage in contractionary monetary policy, they want to do it after the election, because then they'll have strengthened their control, or at least they're going to hope to strengthen their control of Congress, so then they can pass various fiscal bills, whatever. This could come about through them pushing for new voting laws. That's something that's being brought up again, because Biden's having a hard time getting his Build Back Better policies passed. That program. You always want to postpone it. So it's an interesting issue, because this really, even before the housing crisis burst, the classic Ron Paul 2007, 2008, inflation was going up, but it wasn't this bad. You're starting to see inflation get up. If you ask Federal Reserve officials what they thought, if this was in February of 2021, and you asked them what they thought inflation would look like in November of 2021, none of them would have said 7%, which it basically is at. It's at 6.8%, right? It's going up to 7. It's basically 7%. This has come as a surprise, and it's really upset a lot of people, because wages have not kept pace. Right. The administration keeps touting wage growth. Oh, wages are up by about, 4.5%, 5%, but that still means workers are poor, because prices have gone up even more. And you're starting to see workers start to develop inflationary expectations, which means they're starting to see through the bubble. So this is going to the point where Mises sort of alludes to almost like a crack up boom. Am I saying it's going to get that bad, in the near term future? Not yet, but I think we could be in for an inflationary ride.
One more thing before I turn it back over to you, Pete. I wanted to ask you about this. Was there's been all these union strikes and so forth lately about not that their wages are not high enough, but also working conditions. I saw one yesterday where it's Baskin Robbins, and they're complaining that, their quota is 70 cakes a minute or whatever they're supposed to do on the assembly line, some insane thing. And these women are saying that this is just crazy. And I was wondering whether, just occurred to me that this is maybe similar to shrinkflation, right? Where like instead of a 20-ounce bottle of Dr. Pepper, now it's a 16-ounce bottle because they just make it smaller rather than raise the price. Because if you're the company, you got to find a way to split the difference kind of, so the price shock to the customer isn't too much that you turn them away when there's all this upward pressure on prices. And then I wonder, so if that's kind of the same thing too, the way these factory workers are getting squeezed is in a sense a shrinkflation kind of a thing, where the need to make more money per hour for the company has gone up so much that they've got to increase production to make up for it in a way without compensating in terms of wages or hiring new employees to take some of the pressure off. And so then you have the working stiff on the assembly line ends up getting the shaft there. And I don't know, it's a theoretical thing. I just wonder, probably there's already a study at Mises about this or something, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely shrinkflation is important. Murray Rothbard spoke about it briefly in What Has Government Done to Our Money? I teach my students about this the whole time. The classic popsicle, there's more air in the popsicle bag or in the potato chip bag, etc. I do think you are seeing some of that now, and you can be seeing some of that in factories or just restaurants. You see it clearly when I saw it a lot in the summer. I still see it occasionally. You go to a restaurant and there are not enough waitresses, right, to bus tables. So there's some empty tables, and that means you have to wait more. That was a problem, particularly when there were unemployment benefits, but you can still see it. Not everything in the production process is right. There's still workers sitting out of the labor force. That's causing existing workers to have to work harder. Okay. Businesses, they're also under increased compliance costs, potentially having to deal with vaccines and just the whole face mask and lockdown stuff from before. But I know the vaccine requirements are becoming, an issue with testing and so on. And yeah, you're seeing there's this. The demand for goods is going up more, and the supply is still being constrained, or at least it's not keeping up. And yeah, that's showing up. Workers' wages are going down partially through poorer work conditions, right? Just as economists talk about, it's not just the money wage, it's the overall wage, which includes fringe benefits, leisure time, perks of the office, etc. And so this is one of the ways that workers are getting screwed by inflation. And compared to the beginning of the year, when economists were so optimistic, mainstream economists were so optimistic, said the vaccine's coming out, everyone's going to go shop again. Biden passed this new stimulus check, blah, 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 blah. The economy is going to come roaring back. That's what we heard. Second quarter GDP, kind of a disappointment. Third quarter, real disappointment. This quarter, now it's clear inflation's become a problem, etc. It's squeezing a lot of people. And so it's absolutely one of the ways inflation is taking shape is through that shrinkflation that you were describing.
Is there anything we can look at in American history that compares to what we're going through right now?
That's a good question. Interestingly enough, Paul Krugman, who's not exactly my favorite economist, but I do read him, because I'm interested in his opinion, argues that this inflation is very similar to the period after World War II. So Krugman's argument is that, well, it's a bunch of pent up demand. There's just a supply and demand imbalance that's going to go back to normal, and then everything will be fine. I think inflation did increase for a little bit longer than what he says. It went down immediately after World War II, but then it went back up by the end of the decade around the Korean War. Part of that was because, again, the Federal Reserve was basically lost control of its monetary policy. The government wanted it to print a bunch of money, and this was causing pressure on the price system. I think potentially right now, this sort of reminds me a lot of what happened actually 100 years ago, right? I've written a paper on the depression of 1920 to 1921. This is a historical episode. Ron Paul talks a lot about, this is how free market capitalism, can correct recessions and all of that. I agree with all of that 1,001%. But before, you did see this short little boom, this short, sharp inflationary boom. And we potentially could have, like as Scott talks about, like if the bubble crashes, let's say the Fed does raise rates, crashes the bubble, or something happens with China. China's economy is struggling with the Evergrande debt crisis in its real estate market. That could, they could be the epicenter of the crash, just like we were the epicenter 13 years ago. You could see something very similar to what basically happened 100 years ago, maybe only just by like a 3-year lag. So instead of the depression of 1920 to 21, you could have the depression of 1922 to whenever. But that to me, I see that as the most, at least right now, the most similar episode. If the inflation continues and the Federal Reserve continues to print money, not just in 2022, but in 2023, et cetera, then it's looking more and more like the stagflation of the 1970s.
Do you think it makes sense for housing to be so high right now, considering everything that's going on?
Part of that is, I think there's undeniably been relative shifts that have been going on. More people are moving to certain areas. Florida and Texas are experiencing enormous booms because their economies
Sorry, Scott. Sorry, Patrick.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, well, look, I really enjoy living in Florida, so if this is the price I have to pay, then I'll take it.
You just shoot at people when you see a New York license plate. Just take your tires out.
Yeah, exactly.
Here, man.
I'm still waiting for my independent Republic of Florida. Like I'm gonna have my DeSantis bucks, and like all. I'll be using that
because I lived in California for a little while, but I don't deserve this though.
Yeah. But so part of the housing price crisis. I mean, not crisis. The housing increase is due to relative shifts. People are moving out of cities. People are moving down south. A lot of it is also production is constrained. You're seeing this very high prices for resources. Lumber was one of those prices. The prices of goods early in 2021 that shot up and then it went down again a little bit. So people said, "Oh, this is the transitory phenomenon," but it's been back up recently. Biden hasn't made that better. I think there's been a tariff on Canadian lumber recently instituted, et cetera. So this is that the housing prices are going up a lot. More people are moving into houses. That's driving up prices. And you're starting to see, I believe, people taking out loans, et cetera, to build houses. But houses are constrained by production, and demand for them is really increasing. So I think part of the shift in Florida, in Texas, is a relative shift outside of monetary changes, but undoubtedly a large part of it is due to the government policies of lockdown, production constraints, monetary stimulus, so on.
Yeah, well, and look, part of the competition for single-family homes now, which is a brand new phenomenon, is giant Wall Street hedge funds coming in with all this free money that they get, from the Fed and their reserve ratios or whatever, where they're buying up hundreds of single-family homes at a time to rent entire neighborhoods, and then competing with. Typically, your only other competition to buy a home is other single families. And so that's, put all this extra pressure on. And so that's partially because the interest rates are so low that real estate's one of the only things that you can really invest in and make a lot of money on. And so, they're being essentially pushed into that by the, artificially connoitered policy by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ruin regular people.
Yeah, absolutely. Something a lot you don't even hear about too much is that interest rates are really low, as you mentioned. Those are just the nominal interest rates. Once you factor in the fact that you've had inflation, now you're getting negative real interest rates, right? So it's a huge incentive to borrow. It's a huge incentive to try and move into riskier assets, et cetera, so on and so forth. So it's very distortionary. And it's unfortunate that we're starting to see a potential housing problem emerge. It's definitely emerged in other parts of the world, particularly China. I have very low expectations that the governments will deal with it in the proper way. this is it's certainly problematic. I will say that. And on top of what makes it worse, even before the house, inflation's much higher than it was before, and it's very broad based. And that's regular people are hurting in more ways than one. These past 2 years have been very tough. GDP fell by, I think it was like 3.5% in the United States. That was a huge hit. Now you've got this inflation. People are, this has been 2 years of relative, of 2 years of absolute stagnation. One could go so far to argue.
Let's talk a little bit about New York City. When you look at what's happened, I mean, you're from Jersey, right? Originally,
I'm from New Jersey. My brother lives in the city.
Yeah. I mean, so if he lives in the city, he's working in the city. What's he saying about the city? I mean, in New York City, I think basically like all of New York State has like the same GDP as like Russia. So New York City must have like like 75 to 80% of that. What's happening to New York City? Literally where so many of us have our like 401ks and things invested in the stock market. Some people are taking it out and putting it into cryptocurrency, which is probably the smartest move you can do right now. But yeah, how goes New York City? How goes the markets?
Yeah, New York City, there's definitely a shift. COVID caused a lot of people to move out of the city. I know, at least in Tampa, I increasingly see more and more people from New York State in New York City. People are moving out. Earlier in the year, there was I think Miami and places in Florida were almost sort of tempting businesses to move, or, financial centers, et cetera, to move. You're seeing now, that's why you're seeing a lot of progressives push for eliminating restoring the SALT deduction. We're limiting state, we're allowing you to write off your the high state and local taxes you pay, right? Because they realize they're losing citizens. A lot of citizens are getting fed up. Crime's rising in New York City and other cities. The cost of living's a problem. You now have vaccination, just issues. New York City's recently gone into sort of like a mini little lockdown again. I think it's becoming less attractive, which is why you're seeing progressives in New York State, as well as California, et cetera. In many ways, they're trying to cut out their competition, right, of the more lower tax, freer states like Texas and Florida, by spreading some of their citizens there, but then pushing to have various regulations extended there, et cetera, to make those relatively less attractive. It's the exact same thing we see with the corporate income tax. Biden is pushing for higher corporate income taxes around the world because he wants to raise our corporate income tax. So he doesn't want us to become less competitive around the world. New York is doing a similar thing, or at least pushing for a similar thing. This could be, I think, the beginning of at least that city used to be one of the most elite cities in the United States, if not the most, DC, New York City, San Francisco, LA. Slowly but surely, I think other cities in Texas, Florida, et cetera, are kind of gaining ground. And I'm interested to see what New York City will look like in a decade. It could come back, but it also could not.
Got anything, Scott?
Well, yeah, I'm really interested in that. I mean, I guess even in New York, I'm predicting, in relative terms, a swing to the right and an end to this regime at some point. And the American people, even New Yorkers, saying enough is enough. And then, boy, I mean, to think of that megalopolis being even partially empty and needing to be refilled again when circumstances return to, something more decent. I mean, that's a hell of a boom coming there, because, and you know what? I've only been to New York City twice, and one of them was recently, and I went up in the, Empire State Building and looked out, and I was pretty impressed. I know you guys spent a lot of time there and aren't that impressed anymore. But that thing it's pretty impressive. It's pretty hard to imagine it slowing all the way down to a stop in any way. You know what I mean? But I guess as bad as the Democrats can make it, it still just has to amount to potential for the future to swing back again, because it's all still there. Can't get rid of it. Even with the worst depression, what's been literally created out of brick and steel will remain.
Yeah, you could see a move. I mean, I think, upstate New York is definitely getting restless. New Jersey came very close to electing a Republican governor. It fell short, right? So you weren't able to see a repeat of what happened during the beginning of during Obama's first term, when both the Virginia governorship and the New Jersey governorship, basically the Republicans captured those. They were at slightly different times, I believe, but it did become close enough, and it wasn't seen to be a competitive race. The demographics have turned against the Republicans, at least in certain areas. But yeah, but potentially, though, I think New York City is just so progressive that you're not really going to see any substantive. I don't know. I would love to be wrong, and I would love for you to be right. I know New Yorkers, and they bad habits die hard.
Yeah.
I guess,
but I mean,
that's what I'll say.
At the bottom line, though, isn't the point of that city business? I mean, this is the economic capital of the world empire. So, like, damn, man.
Yeah, I think it was business. Now it's about being woke business.
Performatively liberal.
Yeah, or be performatively liberal, being the woke capitalism, being a culture center. And yeah, it
says at the end of the day, the bottom line is what really counts. The color of that ink on the page. We'll see how well being woke pays when it means essentially not doing business anymore. Locking everybody in their house.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Hey, listen, let's spend some time talking about the book, can we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or what?
Good. Well, talk a little bit about I mean, really, I think when I first talked to you about this book, which was like almost a year ago, you said that this was almost like a part 6 of like Conceived in Liberty. Didn't you have that in your head of like this Conceived in Liberty part 6?
Yeah. So I said, Conceived in Liberty part 6. I wanted to, like, the first part of the book, it's the shortest. It really kind of goes through a summary of Rothbard's 5 volumes. It sort of gets into more stuff at the end in chapter 3, but yeah, it really does continue the story that Rothbard planned to write. So I really did write it within the vein of being a Rothbardian, talking about the Jeffersonians and the Jacksonians and the way Murray Rothbard described them as being hardcore libertarians bent on fighting cronyism and reforming the system, etc. So this, if you're interested in the Conceived in Liberty series, I absolutely recommend you to at least take a look at the book. It goes through a lot of sort of hidden stories about corruption and people who were engaged in special interest deals, and just the overall battle between mass movement libertarian forces and statism. So that's my little book plug. I hope people take a look at it and buy it.
Yeah, I remember the first interview we did on it. You had said, I had asked the question, so how soon after the Constitution was the did they just go after it and just absolutely start destroying it? You're like, I think you came up with something that was like 12 months to 18 months after ratification, or after
basically. Yeah. I would argue the Constitution itself was actually a big government document. The strict constructionist view came from the former fighters of the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists, and through the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of Thomas Jefferson. James Madison, I'm not a huge fan of his Virginia resolutions. That's a story for another time. But yeah, it really it was right from the get-go. So it's like,
I can have you and Tom Woods on to debate that.
I would love to. I'm totally in favor of that. So that's all I'll say. I don't know if he will be, but I'd love to do that. I think it's definitely a story. I actually debated Mark Skousen about this in Freedom Fest this year. So we had to speak about Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty and the Constitution. And Mark Skousen was one of the debaters. He was not a fan of Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty series. One of his biggest gripes is that Rothbard is very anti-Benjamin Franklin. And I believe Mark Skousen is a obviously a distant descendant of Benjamin Franklin. So he likes to dress up as him at Freedom Fest. I mean, he's a very nice guy and everything. But so anyway, you can see that he's very, very defensive about Benjamin Franklin. And anyway, so we had to go through this debate and back and forth. And, the argument that, oh, well, the Constitution has still provided the best government, the best economy in the world, the America, et cetera. My response is that, well, that's from the strict constructionist view, which came after, like, the Federalists nearly brought us to like a quasi monarchy under what I like to call Prime Minister Alexander Hamilton. But yeah, so right from the get go, basically, that's when the Republic got corrupted, so to speak. So if you're interested in that early American history, I absolutely recommend you take a look at both Conceived in Liberty and Cronyism.
You're muted, Scott.
I hate it when I do that. Thanks for coming on. I'm really sorry I called you Jonathan earlier. I got you mixed up because you got the same last name as some other guy on Twitter. I don't know. This internet confuses me. I'm an old fuddy-duddy.
Well, yeah,
Newman,
thanks.
Cronyism in America, liberty versus power in America, 1607 to 1849. I'm sorry, say again.
Oh no, thanks. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah, Jonathan. He's also he's affiliated with the Mises Institute. So we have the same last name. We're not actual brothers, though we treat ourselves as if we're brothers in economics, basically. So
okay, great.
It's all good.
Well,
Thanks for
me mixing you up. Good.
Yeah, of course not. Yeah,
so you're like, I hate that guy. He always does that to me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for promoting my book. Happy to talk about inflation. So, thanks.
Yeah, cool. That was fun. All right, Pete. See you in 2 weeks, man. Happy holidays, everybody.